Before steel pierced the sky and electricity erased the night, Manhattan breathed at human height. Dirt streets, wooden homes, open fires, and whispered ambition. This is New York in 1820, crowded, fragile, alive, a city on the edge of becoming something unrecognizable. In 1820, Manhattan was a city built close to the ground. Most buildings rose no more than 3 or 4 stories, constructed from brick or wood, with church steeples and the cupola of City Hall standing among the highest points on the skyline. The city's populated core lay almost entirely south of Canal Street, beyond which farms, country estates, and undeveloped lands stretched northward. Streets were narrow, often unpaved, and designed for foot traffic, carts, and horses rather than speed. This was a pre-industrial urban world shaped by daylight, weather, and physical distance. Expansion was debated but not guaranteed, and the idea of Manhattan becoming a global metropolis was far from certain. Growth existed, but its direction and scale remained unclear. In 1820, daily life on the streets of Manhattan was defined by constant movement and disorder. Most roads were unpaved, turning to mud after rain and dust in dry weather. Horse-drawn carts dominated traffic, leaving behind animal waste that accumulated alongside household refuse. There was no unified sanitation system. Waste was often dumped into the street or nearby waterways. Vendors shouted to advertise food, firewood, or secondhand goods, while dock workers, apprentices, and laborers moved between wharves and workshops. Noise was unavoidable, from iron-rimmed wheels on stone to church bells marking time. Streets functioned as commercial corridors, social spaces, and transport routes simultaneously. Public and private life overlapped constantly, creating an environment that was crowded, unsanitary, and intensely physical by modern standards. By 1820, Manhattan was home to roughly 120,000 people, forming one of the largest cities in the United States. Its population was sharply divided by class, occupation, race, and legal status. Wealthy merchants and professionals lived near Broadway and close to the harbor, while laborers crowded into narrow streets near docks and workshops. Free Black New Yorkers formed a significant community, though they faced legal discrimination and limited economic mobility despite New York's gradual abolition of slavery, which would not fully end until 1827. Irish and other European immigrants were arriving in growing numbers, often settling in overcrowded housing. Many families took in boarders to afford rent, compressing households into single rooms. Social divisions were visible within a few blocks, shaping daily interactions and opportunities. Housing in Manhattan in 1820 reflected both limited resources and constant danger. Many structures were built of wood, especially in poorer districts, while brick construction was becoming more common only after repeated fires exposed the city's vulnerability. Buildings were narrow, tightly packed, and often poorly ventilated. Families commonly shared rooms, and attics or basements were rented to boarders. Open hearths and stoves provided heat and cooking, increasing the risk of fire in every household. Organized fire protection existed through volunteer fire companies, but equipment was basic and response times uneven. Major fires in the late 18th and early 19th centuries had already destroyed large sections of the city, reinforcing a shared awareness that entire neighborhoods could vanish overnight. Often without warning, work in Manhattan in 1820 was physical, time-consuming, and often unstable. The city's economy revolved around its port, with longshoremen unloading cargo from ships arriving from the Caribbean, Europe, and other American ports. Skilled artisans worked as printers, carpenters, coopers, and blacksmiths, usually in small workshops attached to their homes. Domestic servants, many of them women or free Black New Yorkers, labored in private households with long hours and little security. Children frequently worked as apprentices or street vendors, contributing to family income from an early age. There were no standardized workdays or labor protections. Earnings depended on demand, weather, and health. Survival required constant effort, and for many residents, a single illness or injury could mean immediate financial collapse. Disease was a constant presence in Manhattan during the early 19th century, shaped by overcrowding, poor sanitation, and limited medical knowledge. Drinking water was often drawn from shallow wells contaminated by waste, while privies overflowed into streets and waterways. Outbreaks of yellow fever had repeatedly struck the city in the 1790s, killing thousands and driving wealthier residents to flee north or leave temporarily. By 1820, cholera had not yet arrived, but fears of epidemic disease remained high. Medical treatment was rudimentary, relying on bloodletting, purging, and herbal remedies with little understanding of infection. Death was familiar, visible, and rarely distant, shaping how residents understood risk and survival. Crime and informal vice were embedded in daily life in Manhattan in 1820, shaped by poverty, rapid population growth, and limited law enforcement. The city had no professional police force. Public order relied on night watchmen and constables who were poorly paid and inconsistently effective. Gambling houses, unlicensed taverns, and brothels operated openly, particularly near the docks, where sailors spent wages quickly before ships departed again. Theft, assault, and fraud were common concerns, especially in crowded neighborhoods with transient populations. Areas that would later gain notoriety, such as the Five Points District, were beginning to form as dense, impoverished enclaves. Moral reform societies warned of urban decay, but regulation remained weak. Crime was not hidden. It was a visible consequence of inequality, instability, and limited institutional control. Religion, leisure, and public spectacle offered structure and relief in Manhattan in 1820. Protestant churches dominated the religious landscape, shaping moral life through sermons, charity, and social pressure, while smaller Catholic and Jewish communities were beginning to establish a presence. Taverns served as key social centers, hosting political discussion, drinking, and informal business. Entertainment was public and often communal. Theaters staged popular melodramas. Street performers drew crowds, and public executions, though declining, still attracted spectators. Parades and civic celebrations marked national holidays and political victories, reinforcing shared identity in a rapidly changing city. For many residents, these spaces offered brief escape from exhausting labor and constant uncertainty. Belief and entertainment were not separate spheres but intertwined responses to hardship, providing meaning, distraction, and social cohesion in a dense urban environment. By 1820, Manhattan stood at a point of transition rather than destiny. Plans like the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 had already imposed a grid that would reshape the island, but most of that future still existed only on paper. North of Canal Street, farmland, rocky terrain, and scattered estates dominated the landscape. Industrialization was beginning elsewhere, and New York's role within it remained uncertain. The Erie Canal would open in 1825, transforming trade and accelerating growth, but in 1820 its impact was still speculative. The city was expanding, yet fragile, dependent on commerce, labor, and migration it could not fully control. The modern metropolis was not inevitable. It was the result of choices, pressures, and events still unfolding.